At the anniversary dinner, my sister Chloe slid the breadbasket toward my son like it was a punishment. We didn't order anything for him. Mom said he's too picky anyway. My father didn't even look up. Should have packed him a snack. Nolan's shoulders folded in small and silent while their kids cut into $100 steaks. I felt something inside me crack. Not loud, just final. I said one word. Noted. They thought that was the end of it. But what they didn't know was... Before I continue, tell me where you're watching from. And hit like and subscribe if you've ever been betrayed by family. For years I thought moments like that dinner were normal, just more quiet wounds I was supposed to swallow. I didn't realize this time was different. This time, their cruelty wasn't going to fade into the background. This time, it was the crack that finally let the truth pour out. I didn't grow up in a loud house. Ours was the kind of quiet that told you exactly who mattered. I learned that when I was 8, sitting at the old oak table my dad polished every Sunday like it was some sacred relic. Chloe was swinging her legs, bragging about a spelling quiz she got a B on. Mom beamed, dropped an extra scoop of mashed potatoes on her plate and said, "You worked so hard." My plate stayed nearly empty. Dad didn't look up. I pushed a green bean in circles pretending I wasn't hungry, pretending I didn't notice. I didn't cry, I just swallowed it. And that silence carved its first mark into me. I didn't understand the pattern until years later when I was 14 and found the letter. It was buried in a plastic bin of old school photos in the garage under the smell of dust and dried paint. I thought it was a birthday card. Instead, it was my mother's handwriting in neat blue ink. "I don't feel connected to my second daughter. She's too independent. Too easy to ignore. Too easy to ignore." I didn't know it then, but that sentence would matter more than anything they ever said to my face. High school was more of the same. Chloe floated through classes with C's and excuses, and Mom called her creative. When I won second place in a statewide science fair, Dad just asked, "Why not first?" At home, Mom forced Chloe to pose with my certificate for memories. You can guess whose picture made it into the family album. I became the reliable one by conditioning, not choice. When I turned 16, I worked in the Arizona heat pushing grocery carts to help with bills, because Dad said Chloe needed her allowance to stay motivated. I handed Mom the cash, watched relief wash over her. Weeks later, I overheard Chloe bragging she bought concert tickets because Mom is basically an ATM. The money I earned was never mine. It was the cost of maintaining peace. College should have been the escape, but Chloe's mistakes dragged me back. When she maxed out the credit card Dad co-signed and collectors started calling, Dad didn't go to her. He came to my dorm. "You're the responsible one. Fix it." And I did. Canceled my spring break, pulled extra shifts, wired her nearly $1,000. She never thanked me. Later she told people she handled everything on her own. I didn't say anything. But I kept every receipt. Life marched on in its uneven way. I graduated, got my job at the charter school, and tried to build a life that felt steady. My apartment was small, but warm lamps glowing, soft vanilla candles burning low. And then Nolan was born. Quiet, observant Nolan, who seemed to see every bruise no one else ever acknowledged. I promised myself his childhood would be different from mine, that he'd never feel invisible at his own family's table. But families have a way of pulling old wounds into new generations, seeping through cracks you didn't know were open. I didn't realize then that everything I survived, the silence, the favoritism, the emotional bookkeeping, wasn't just the past, it was the setup. And soon all of it was going to matter. When Nolan was born, I realized how much of my childhood had hardened inside me. The first night home, he curled his tiny fingers around mine and something in me shifted. I whispered, "You don't have to be the strong one." Maybe I was telling him. Maybe I was telling the girl I used to be. The first time Chloe met Nolan, she wrinkled her nose. "Wow, he cries a lot. Just like you did." Mom laughed like it was a harmless joke. Dad didn't look away from the TV. I held Nolan closer, feeling heat crawl up my neck. But I said nothing. Silence was still my default setting. As Nolan grew, he clung to me during visits to my parents' house. Whenever Chloe's boys screamed or smashed toys, he'd bury his face in my shoulder. Mom waved it off. "He's sensitive. You baby him too much." But she never corrected Chloe's kids, not once. It was the same script I grew up under, just with new actors. By the time Nolan was 5, he'd begun noticing things I wished he didn't. Why does Grandma smile more at them? Why does Aunt Chloe call us dramatic? Why does Grandpa hug me only when people are watching? I'd force a smile and tell him families were complicated. But inside, something twisted fear that he'd internalize the same message I did, that love had conditions attached. One Thanksgiving stands out sharply. The house smelled like roasting turkey and cinnamon candles. Chloe's boys ran wild in superhero capes, knocking ornaments off the tree. Nolan sat quietly beside me on the couch, clutching his stuffed fox. During dinner, Mom placed 2 rolls on Chloe's plate, one on each boy's, and slid the basket right past Nolan. Past me. Dad poured himself wine like nothing was wrong. Nolan whispered, "Can I have one?" so softly, it nearly broke me. "You already had snacks earlier," Mom said without looking. He hadn't. I tore a roll in half and handed it to him. Chloe rolled her eyes. "You're creating a timid kid." I chewed my food in silence, but that moment hit differently. I wasn't the only one swallowing hurt anymore. Nolan was learning how. Not everything in my life was heavy. Mason and Evelyn were the family I should have had. Their home smelled like cedar and cinnamon, warm in a way that made you exhale without realizing you were holding your breath. They noticed things: how Nolan shrank when someone raised their voice, how my smile sometimes didn't reach my eyes. One night, after helping me move a bookshelf, Mason leaned against my kitchen counter and said, "They trained you to survive, not to live." I laughed him off, but the truth lodged deep. At work, I was confident, solving problems, calming angry parents, juggling chaos without blinking. But around my own blood, I became small again. The older I got, the more I realized the past wasn't staying in the past. It was circling back, patterns repeating, and every year they grew harder to ignore. I didn't know it then, but all those small humiliations, the overlooked meals, the forced silence, the emotional bookkeeping, were piling up, waiting for the one moment that would crack everything open. And that moment was coming. The weeks before the anniversary dinner felt off, in a way I couldn't name. Not dramatic, just small shifts. A tone here, a message there. The kind of signs you only recognize later, once the damage is done. It started with a text from my mother. Just family, nothing fancy. A harmless line, except it never meant harmless. It meant don't expect anything. And when I offered to book the restaurant, she added, "Chloe's been stressed. Pick somewhere quiet for her." No mention of me. No concern for Nolan. Same choreography as always. I booked the steakhouse anyway, a place with low lighting, gold fixtures, and quiet corners where Nolan wouldn't get overwhelmed. I spent hours choosing the table and restoring their wedding photo, the one they'd nearly ruined in a drawer. I wanted the night to be peaceful. Maybe even healing. Then Chloe texted, "Dad wants the money today." I froze. "What money?" I asked. "The restaurant deposit." "Don't make this difficult." There was no deposit. I knew because I booked it. When I called to double check, the hostess said, "No charge until you dine." Chloe wasn't confused. She was crafting a story. One where I was irresponsible, and she was the martyr who had to pick up my slack. A story my family loved to believe. That same weekend, Nolan came home from my parents' house different. He dropped his backpack, sank onto the couch, pulled the hood of his Fox sweatshirt up. "What happened, baby?" He hesitated, then whispered. "Caleb said, kids who don't get meals don't matter." My stomach turned cold. Did Grandma or Grandpa say anything? They laughed. That laugh, the same one I grew up hearing, hit harder than the words. I pulled Nolan into my arms, breathed in the warm scent of his shampoo, and felt something dark settle in my chest. Not rage, something heavier, something patient. A few days later, I learned from a coworker that Evan had uploaded a vlog called Big Family Weekend, the thumbnail Nolan. Sitting stiff on my parents' couch, eyes down, fox toy clutched tight. Evan hadn't asked permission. Mom told him it was good for family image. When I confronted him, he shrugged. "It's harmless. He's barely in it." "He's in the thumbnail," I said. Evan grinned like it was a compliment. "Cute kids get more views." I deleted the video myself. The next hit came from a place I didn't expect: the office in my parents' house. I'd stopped by to drop off a toolbox Mason needed, planning to leave quickly. But something made me pause by the old filing cabinet. Maybe instinct? Maybe decades of knowing there were always secrets tucked behind closed drawers. I found a folder with my name on it. Thin. Too thin. Inside, a behavioral evaluation from when I was 14. In my mother's handwriting, it said, "Marley struggles with emotional consistency and may require monitoring." A fabricated record. Signed. Filed. A lie she turned into evidence. My throat burned. I remembered Chloe mocking me at that age, saying, "Mom says you're unstable." I thought she was being dramatic. Now I knew she was quoting a document Mom created. I left the house shaking, gripping the folder so hard the edges bent. Then came Mason's voice on my phone that night, low and tense. "Can I come by?" When he arrived, he didn't sit. "Chloe tried to sell the music box," he said. "What music box?" "The heirloom. The one you restored for your mom." My stomach hollowed. That box was part of our grandmother's story. Something my father claimed was untouchable. Chloe had listed it online for cash. Piece by piece, the picture sharpened: lies, manipulation, exploitation, cruelty. And in the middle of it, Nolan absorbing every blow I once swallowed. By the night before the dinner, I knew something was coming. Not because of anything they said, but because of everything they didn't. The quiet was too familiar, the kind that always arrived before the storm. Nolan crawled into my bed that night. "Do we have to go?" "It's just dinner," I said. But deep down, I already knew the truth. It wasn't just dinner, it was the edge of the breaking point. The night of the anniversary dinner felt wrong the second we walked through the doors. Nolan's hand tightened in mine as the warmth of butter and grilled ribeye filled the room. He looked small in his navy blazer, the sleeves brushing his wrists. "We're okay," I whispered, though neither of us fully believed it. Chloe's family had already claimed the booth like royalty. Her boys shouted at their screens. Evan raised his bourbon in a smug little greeting, and my parents sat stiffly, eyes flat, energy already tilted in Chloe's direction. No one glanced at the gift bag holding the restored wedding photo. I'd carried it carefully, hoping stupidly that it would mean something. When Nolan whispered that he wanted chicken tenders, his voice was hopeful. Soft. Before he could speak to the waiter, Chloe slid the bread basket toward him. We didn't order anything for him. Mom said he's too picky anyway. Dad didn't even look up. Should have packed him a snack. The words hit like they were rehearsed. Nolan's shoulders folded in. He stared at the table as if trying not to exist. Something inside me went absolutely still, a stillness that wasn't weakness anymore, but the center of a brewing storm. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't flinch. I said one word. Noted. They blinked like they didn't understand it. They would. The rest of the dinner dragged. Chloe whispering to Evan, "She's unstable." My mom avoiding eye contact like guilt was contagious. My dad cutting his steak with the same sharpness he used on me as a kid. I kept my posture straight, my voice calm, my eyes steady. The fuse was lit, but I wasn't going to burn first. When the check came, the waiter placed it directly in front of my father. His eyes flicked to me with irritation, as if my existence had raised the bill. Not one word about the restaurant I booked. Not one word about the photo. Not one word to Nolan. That night, my phone blew up. "Chloe, you owe Dad $1,200. Pay your share." "Mom, you embarrassed us. Dad, control yourself." I put the phone face down and let the quiet settle. It didn't suffocate me this time. It sharpened me. The next morning, the knock came. Hard. Erratic. I already knew. Harold, Linda, Chloe. They walked in like they were doing a wellness check on a wild animal. Nolan sat on the couch, gripping his switch eyes, scanning my face. I nodded once, silent reassurance. Then I turned to them. Harold slapped the envelope on the counter. $1,200. You owe us. I never agreed to pay, I said. And you humiliated my son. Chloe crossed her arms, sunglasses still on, though we were indoors. Here we go. She's doing the victim thing. Mom muttered, "People saw Marley. You caused a scene." I almost laughed at how predictable they were. But then my phone buzzed in my pocket. Unknown number. Voicemail. I pressed play. "This is the Department of Child Services. We received a report about your son." My vision tunneled. Someone had escalated the game. Someone had weaponized the system. I looked up slowly. My mother blinked too fast. Chloe's jaw clenched. No one spoke. But guilt has weight. It fills a room. And it filled mine. CPS arrived 2 hours later. They walked through my warm apartment lamps, glowing vanilla candles burning low, Nolan's drawings taped to the fridge. They saw what was real. When they left, one of them paused and said quietly, "Family reports are rarely about the child." That was the moment something shifted permanently, not rage clarity. That night, after Nolan fell asleep, I opened the drawer where I'd kept my evidence, the therapy letter, the forged school report, the transfers, the screenshots. Every quiet wound turned into documentation. I placed each page into a binder. Not revenge record, not anger preparation. The storm wasn't coming. It was here. And this time, I wasn't the one who would break. They showed up just after sunset, Harold in front, rigid and red-faced, Linda tight-lipped behind him, and Chloe leaning on the railing like she'd come to watch a spectacle. The sky outside was fading into dark blue, and the last bit of peace in my apartment dimmed with it. The doorbell rang again, sharper this time. Nolan was coloring at the kitchen table, soft humming under his breath. I opened the door and felt the air shift. "We need to settle this," Harold said, stepping inside without waiting. Linda and Chloe followed, bringing tension with them like a smell. Nolan looked up, uncertain. "It's okay," I told him. "Stay right there." He nodded, but I saw his fingers tighten around his pencil. Harold dropped an envelope onto the counter. $1,200. Your share of the dinner." "I never agreed to pay for anything," I said. "I offered to organize the dinner. You turned it into a performance." Chloe scoffed. "Here she goes, acting unstable again." She pointed at me like she was diagnosing a patient. "You embarrassed everyone. You've been off for years. The old me would have shrunk. This version didn't." I opened the binder I'd placed on the counter. My hands were steady. "Let's talk about unstable," I said. The first page, Chloe's texts begging for money. "You needed $500 to fix a misunderstanding with the bank in 2018. Her smirk twitched. Next page, months of rent payments I covered. "You said you'd pay me back. You never did." Chloe's mouth tightened. "That's private. Not anymore." Harold's voice rose sharp. "This is unnecessary." "No," I said calmly. "This is accountability." I slid the forged school report toward Linda, the one claiming I was emotionally inconsistent at 14. "You wrote this, Mom." Linda's face drained. I don't remember." "You signed it," I said. Before anyone could scramble for excuses, the apartment door opened again. Mason and Evelyn stepped inside. Evelyn's eyes softened at Nolan, then sharpened at the rest. Mason crossed his arms. "Chloe, he said you want to explain this, or should I?" Chloe stiffened. "Explain what?" Mason pulled up a video on his phone and placed it on the counter. The screen showed his driveway. Chloe's son standing there. Chloe's voice behind the camera saying, "Go on. Tell him kids who don't get meals don't matter." The boy repeated it, laughed. Silence hit the room like a slammed door. Linda sank onto a chair, hands shaking. Chloe stammered. That's out of context. There is no context, I said. My voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. I opened my wallet, took out $600 and placed it beside the envelope. Here's half, I said. Not from guilt. From pettiness. I sleep better knowing you didn't get all of it. Harold's jaw flexed. You're being disrespectful. No, I answered. I'm being done. I walked to the door and opened it. For a second, no one moved. Then Harold stood. Linda followed, shaky and pale. Chloe lingered, swallowing hard like she finally tasted the truth. One by one, they stepped out. When the door closed behind them, the apartment felt bigger, lighter. Nolan walked over and slipped his hand into mine. You weren't scared, he whispered. And for the first time in my life, it was true. After they left, the silence in my apartment felt different, lighter, almost clean. Nolan leaned into me, his small hand still warm from clutching his pencil. Mom, he whispered, you weren't scared. I brushed his hair back. No, I said. Not anymore. The next morning, sunlight barely crept through the blinds when my phone buzzed. A voicemail from the CPS worker. The report is unfounded, she said. We won't be moving forward. These situations often come from family. Her pause said everything. It didn't erase what they'd tried to do, but it confirmed exactly who they were. By noon, I was sitting across from attorney Megan Price. Her office smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and ink. Diplomas lined the wall behind her. She listened without interrupting while I laid out everything, the harassment, the lies, the CPS report, the binder full of receipts they thought I'd never collect. When I finished, she closed the folder and said, We're filing a cease and desist today, and we'll respond to the grandparents' rights petition before they even try it. There was no drama in her tone, just certainty. It was the first time in a long time I felt like someone was standing between me and the storm. 3 days later, the court dismissed Harold and Linda's petition immediately. No hearing, no negotiation, just gone. Megan emailed me one line, told you. That evening, Nolan and I drove up to Prescott Lake. The sky was scraped with pink and gold, the water still and glassy. We roasted marshmallows until they melted down our fingers. Nolan leaned against me and said, You seem different, Mom. I watched the fire crackle. That's what freedom feels like, I told him. Back home, I placed the binder on a high shelf not as ammunition, but as a boundary. A line that would never be crossed again. They didn't know it, but their biggest power over me died the moment they tried to weaponize the system against my son. This wasn't revenge. This was rescue me, choosing both of us over them. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel obligated to keep the peace, and that was its own kind of justice. A few days after our trip, I checked the mailbox and found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a single typed line, Thank you for breaking the cycle. Signed, someone who wished you did it earlier. I stood on the porch, the evening air cool against my skin, wondering who finally said what everyone else was too scared to admit. It wasn't closure. It was a warning. Or maybe a beginning. If you've ever felt like the outsider in your own family, subscribe. This story isn't over.